We had no fridges, and my mom used to use the salt for preservatives, because Jesus said we are the salt of the earth and we are the light of the world. And this was important for us to get a hold of that. But I always thought that salt was like something to flavor your food with, because you go into the kitchen and you put a little bit of salt in and it's fine. But when it came to keeping it overnight, the fish overnight, and my mom used to gut the fish and fillet it and put it all down and put it out, and then she would smother it in salt. Then after that, when we were going to have it, she would wash all the salt off, and the salt was preserved. It preserved the fish. And that's what I always, growing up, that's what I always thought it was about. And when we get to the light, the salt, we get it in the book of Matthew, chapter 5, verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, Jesus is telling his disciples. But if the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown and to be trampled underfoot. You are the light of the world. Built on a hill, and it should be shining and not to be hidden. Now, this is important. He's telling us two things here. He's telling us we are salt of the earth, and we're also the light of the world. Now, funny enough, and when we get to Luke, Jesus talks about the salt of the world. He talks about how the salt can lose its saltiness. And then he says that you're the light of the world. Now, we go around as Christians and we think, yeah, we're the salt of the earth. We do a little bit of good here. We do a little bit of good there. But there are a few things that we've got to understand. I'm going to read from Luke 14, verse 34 and 35. Jesus said, salt is good. His word was actually, salt is excellent. But if it becomes insipid, with what shall it be seasoned? In other words, how do we get it stop it from being insipid? It is useless either for soil. I can't remember going out and put salt on soil. Either for soil or for manure. Now, I don't know about you, but we never really used the salt for manure. But this is what Jesus was saying, and this is what he was meaning, and this was the first century meaning. And this is how often we take today's, what we think, and we put it in there. And if we can read that, we're the salt of the earth, and we feel great. Well, we understand that. But when it comes to that, we can lose our saltiness, and also it can be used for manure. And I'm just wondering now what he's talking about. Well, you see, salt affects our environment by being what it is. In both cases, salt does nothing. Light does nothing. All they do is that they are being something. They are being salt. Salt is being salt. It's not panicking and running around looking for something to salt. It is salt. Light is there. Light is there when it's switched on, when it's daylight, when it is there. It's not running around trying to please people either. So if the salt is going to be, and the light is going to be there, it's not because of a lot of talk, or a lot of doing, or a lot of actions, or what we want to do. We're going to do something, we're going to be something that is totally, we're going to be different from our environment, because salt and light is different from our environment. And it's because they're different, they actually affect the environment. In fact, so different, we should be able to affect our environment. In Luke's gospel, that's what Jesus meant. Matthew's gospel doesn't tell us, he just tells us about the salt and the soil. But what Luke goes on to do, and it really is, when you actually, it is a bit of an eye-opener. Luke tells us in verse 35 that the salt he was talking about, its uses for them. The salt is scraped up back in the days of Jesus, and they would go down to the Dead Sea, and they would scrape up the salt and fill up the salt buckets, and they would bring them back up again. And it had a salinity. in it, and it had a salinity of about 33%, which isn't really that, for salt. And that's the reason. The reason is because it had other minerals mixed in with it. When you think of the oceans that we know, the salinity of the salt in the oceans is 85%, and that is where we get our table salt from. It's got potassium. The Dead Sea one has got potassium chloride. And I don't know if anybody here who is a gardener. I know Lillian is a gardener, and she looks after my orchids just purely because, just to give them a break from me. And also when my wife comes back, she would like to see them alive. So we got this potassium chloride, which is called potash, and potash is 95% of which comes out of the Dead Sea. Phosphate to develop the roots, it's got nitrate to develop the leaves, and it's got potash, which improves the leaves, the flowers, and it improves the fruit that you get from it. So from the Dead Sea, well, it's widely used as a fertilizer. So that's where we get that from, and that's what Jesus was saying. He says, in Matthew it says, you are the salt of the earth. And when we think of the salt of the earth, we think, well, we are the salt of the global earth. No, Jesus was talking about you are the salt. The word is soil. You are the salt of the soil, so that you can make things grow, make things that you want to grow, grow. It's used as a fertilizer. Fertilizers to make good things grow. Then he spoke about the manure pile and the dunghill. And I thought, well, let's get into this, because I remember with my dad, we used to have processions going past and with horses and stuff. And my dad he grew roses. So he would stand with a wheelbarrow waiting for the horse for nature to take its course with the horse. I remember a policeman looked at him one day. He says, Jimmy, why can't you just enjoy the procession like everybody else? But he got some good horse manure. But this manure that Jesus is talking about isn't the same. What he's talking about is the excrement of humans. And that's what he's talking about when he says to put it on dunghills. That's all it's used for. The manure pile, the dunghill, a word used for human excretia. They would go to this. You see, what they would do, they would go to a spot, if they lived in the first century, and they were, first of all, no Jew was allowed to go to the loo inside the camp. All right, so inside the camp, let's just say inside the city, the old city, they weren't allowed to go to the toilet. They had to go outside. And if you lived outside, you would have your own spot. You'd have your own place. I'm going to go, I don't think they went and read the paper and stuff like that, but they would go to their own place, and then they would do what they had to do. And then they would have beside them, they would have a box. And in that box was huge amount of this mixture of salt and minerals beside them. And according to the law of Moses, they were to lift it up and bury what they'd just done. A bit, I suppose, like what a cat would do. We had a cat once, and every time it did its business in the garden, it would bury it. Has anybody had that experience? Not with spades. This one was crazy. But they were covering it over. And you see, this manure pile is what it was for, because it acts, because of the minerals in it, in the Dead Sea, it acts as a disinfectant to stop the spread of things you don't want to grow. So those two things, they give you two aspects of salt. One, it promotes the good things as a fertilizer you want to grow, and then it also inhibits the bad things you don't want to grow. So Christians are the salt of the earth. You're the people that can stop bad things growing and promote good things that you want to grow. Why? Because you are the salt of the earth. Not by saying anything, because the salt doesn't say anything. Not by doing anything, but just by being. Just by being there. There was a man called St. Francis of Assisi, and he said at all times preach the gospel. He says, but if necessary, use words. So if we translate that into our society, it will take a certain proportion of the society being Christian to make things different. And unfortunately, we don't have enough salt in the world today, all over the world. We just don't have enough salt. And I'm not talking about the mineral salt, I'm talking about Christian salt. We just don't have enough. That's why our social trends are going the wrong way. Oh, and we may be able to win a battle, where we can, I'm joining a protest. I'm going to go and protest down the road, and we're going to protest for whatever your protest is. I'm going to protest. And we may win that particular protest. We will lose the war because we just don't have enough salt. We don't have enough Christians around. There's going to be moral decay, and society is not going to get better. We need more salt. And the funny thing about it is, it has been proven, if there is a limit of 5% of salt, things improve. Things do improve. The first thing that we look at is that the quantity of salt is one of the aspects of salt. So a sprinkling is enough. The little sprinkling in the kitchen you put in your soup or your stew, that's perfect. But when we look at that as a Christian life, it's not good enough. The second aspect is of distribution. We've got to distribute. It's no point having a salt in a salt cellar, cooking something and not using it. You've got the salt, but it's not being used. Salt is no use in the salt cellar or the box. It has to come in direct contact with what it wants to influence. Do you get me? It has to come into contact with what it wants to. For example, it operates by its presence, not by its absence. It has to be there. And that's why we get places like, I'm glad my child has gone to a Christian school. Or the monasteries go away and they all stay together. Or you get a pastor's retreat, or you get a convent or something like that. All these people go away. We here today are doing nothing in being the salt of the earth. Why? Because we're here. The salt has to be in direct contact. The fertilizer has to be in direct contact with what it has to affect. And us being here, although the Bible says we must assemble together, and we do, but when we get out of here, we're back into that world, and we're back into the dirt of the environment of what we are supposed to change. So Christians would love to work with other Christians. I hear it on a regular basis. I'm the only Christian in church or at work. I'm the only Christian in the office, and I see this advert for a job, and I know that I can get it. I know I'm qualified for it. And you know what? These are Christians, and I can pray before we start work, and then we'll have the day in front of us. That all sounds very good, but God has put you in a place where there may not be Christian. You might be the only Christian in the place, and then you leave. Then there's no Christians in that place. You should be praying that God will bring in other Christians into your workplace. And don't you leave, because God has put you in that particular environment so that you can influence that environment. I've been in places where people will swear, and then they look at me, and then they apologize. Oh, sorry I said that, Pastor. It slipped out. No, it didn't slip out. It came right the way out. It was out long ago. But his conscience made him feel that maybe he shouldn't have said something like that. And if we get up to 5% of people mixing around, then that does change. The moral aspect of our life can, in fact, change. The disinfectant is no good unless you get among the dirt. Don't rush to get out of a place if you're the only Christian. We do need Christians everywhere. We need Christians in local government. We need Christians in national government. We need Christians in sport. And sport, because they are the guys, people, we're watching them on TV, and we'll say, gee, this guy here, this guy is a Christian. Then he comes up and says something like, totally not Christian. I remember when they used to get these drug addicts from Cape Town. One of the two brothers, one was killed and burnt in a car, and the other one, he became a born-again Christian. He became famous, and he was going around and he was giving his testimony and his witness, and 3 months later, he was no longer, he was back on drugs, he was selling drugs, he was killing people, and that sort of thing. We are so keen to have these people around and to listen and to feed off them, but we must be careful. Why? Because Jesus is with each and every one of you. You are the salt of the earth. Not Joe Soap from Cape Town, but you are the salt of the earth. So therefore, we have to get into contact, and we mustn't lose our savor. The third aspect of salt is its quality. First is the amount. Second is the distribution. In other words, we should spread around. And the third is it cannot lose, we mustn't lose our saltiness. Now, when we come to hydrochloric, sodium hydrochloride, table salt, it cannot lose its flavor. It doesn't. It's impossible to lose its flavor. Sodium chloride does not lose its flavor at all. It is always salty. But hold on a second, Jesus said that it can. So what was he talking about? Well, let's see what he was actually talking about. In Matthew 5, verse 13, you are the salt of the earth. If the salt loses its saltiness, how can it be made salty again? So how can the salt lose its saltiness if it's impossible? And the answer is very simple. We're back to the Dead Sea, and that's where they got their salts from. Back to the Dead Sea, and the salt sellers, the guys who would collect the salt traders were very clever, because what they would do, they would add sand when they're collecting it, and they would sell a bag of salt. And when you got home, that bag of salt was half filled with sand, and that salt was useless to you. In fact, the woman of the house, the housewife back in the first century, would throw it out. That's why Jesus said it's only good for treading underfoot. It's not even good for when you go down to your toilet and use it. It's just hasn't got enough in it. It's just no good for that. So the quality of the salt has to be there. It's got to be there. How does salt lose its savor? Well, let's translate that into today's life. Simply by being mixed with other substances. How do we Christians lose our flavor? How do we become effective in this world? Because we lose our saltiness. Now, I've just told you that the other salt loses its saltiness because it's diluted by other minerals. And we often get diluted by the things we watch, by the things we say, and by the things we do. And that is where we lose it altogether. The salt dealer is clever. He will add the sand. And Satan is clever. He will put into your life someone will come up to you and say, you're not a Christian. Look what you did. I saw what you did. And you start to lose a little bit of your saltiness because maybe you've done something too far. Churches, let me go into this one. Churches are the same. you go to churches, and some of the churches you might be able to be going to a club. They've got the flashing lights, they've got the roller ball, they've got everything going, they've got the music all pumped up, and everybody's, jazzing around, praising the Lord, supposedly. And that's it. You take that away from them and say to them, listen, come to our church on Sunday, and we will teach you the Word of God. You will soon have an empty church, because that's not what they were attracted to. They were attracted to the things of the world. Someone said, it was a guy, I think his name was David Pawson. He said that a lifeboat is meant to be in the sea. That's the church. But once the sea gets into the lifeboat, we're in trouble. And that's what's happening with all these modern things. I was talking to Jan the other week, and he was saying one of the reasons he left his church was they started, not just with the lights and with all the fancy guitars and everything that was going on, but they started with smoke machines. So you had smoke machines coming in, and then all of a sudden you have a big smoke pile, and then your pastor appears in front of you, Let's get on to the light, and I'm closing now. In verse 14, he talks about the light. All right, so the light can also be negative and be positive. It's got two things. Light can expose you, and light can actually show you up. That's what it can do. It can expose you, and it can show you up, but it can also show you the right way to go. So it's got some good aspects to it. And the light is great, because if you've got a torch and you've got a light, especially here living in South Africa, and if we have load shedding at night time, it's always good to have a little bit of light in front of you. Otherwise, you are groping in the dark. And some of the places I've ended up has been ridiculous. You don't even have the fridge light to help you. You're opening the oven and you're looking for some milk or something like that. But it's a position that it will function in showing the right path, lighting up the way. Now here's, and I'm finishing with this. The text of this particular story is that a woman was brought in adultery. This is in John 8, verses 1 through 11. You can read this when you go home. And this woman was brought by the Pharisees and the Sadducees and all the learned men. And they said to him, he was sitting in the temple, and they said she was caught in the act of adultery. All right, when you actually read into it, by the Jewish law, she should have been stoned to death. And the Romans weren't keen on that. They didn't like that. They preferred their law. Their law overruled the Jewish law. But they were putting him in a trap. The trap was she should be stoned to death, or what do we do? Or is she set free? Moses said she should be stoned to death. What do you say? So Jesus got down and he started to write something on the ground. Now, what did he say? Now, in the context, the woman was taken in adultery. So the way the Jewish law is, if she was caught in adultery, no doubt the guy she was with was caught in adultery. They should have both been stoned according to the law. That's the way it was. So Jesus wrote on the ground, and there's been so much speculation of what he wrote. You go to every church and every pastor will tell you, well, this is what he wrote. He wrote this down. He wrote the sins down. He wrote everything down. Some people say, no, he was just down there doodling. But he wrote with his finger. And so it doesn't matter what he wrote. He wrote with his finger. Only God, according to the Jews, wrote with his finger. And what Jesus was expressing to say was, Jesus was saying, I wrote the law. All he was saying all the way through the Sermon on the Mount, Moses says, you do this. I say, you do that. Moses says, this is how you do this. This is how I say it. In other words, what he was saying was, Moses have says this, but you're not understanding. This is what I meant. And this is what the Sermon on the Mount is all about. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees, they brought her, and they were aware of what he was claiming to be. They also would have been aware of, because they were very learned men, of Jeremiah chapter 17, verse 13. And it says there, those who turn away from you will be written in the dust. And Jesus was writing in the dust. And I believe he was writing the sins of the people in the dust. And I believe that as they were looking at them, the Bible says they started to go away from the oldest one, Ken, to the youngest one, Jim. And they started to disappear because they knew that they were also guilty. Now, what he said was those without sin throw the first stone. He didn't mean that because they were all sinners. He says, but those of you who recognize that your conscience is bad, you can leave. They all left, from the oldest to the youngest. Jesus was left alone with her. He stood up and he looked and he said, where are your accusers? She says, they've all gone. You have to have at least two accusers. There's only her and Jesus left. He said, then neither do I accuse you. If you ever get into trouble, Jesus is the best lawyer to have. Right? Not this guy Dubai you see on the TV, but Jesus is the one. He is the one. He's the best lawyer you can get. And he said, then neither do I condemn you. You can go. He says, but, he said, the Bible says don't sin no more. What he actually did say was, because everybody's going to sin, what he actually said was, don't do that again. And that's how he did it. And he showed her mercy. Because you see, when we have mercy and we have grace, it just doesn't mean that we can go back and do whatever we want all over again. But Jesus let her go. And then he said, in the next chapter, he stood up to the people who were left behind, who didn't walk away from him, like Jeremiah 17 said. And he stood up and he said, I am the light of the world. He who follows me will never walk in darkness. And it's only when you're in darkness do you follow that type of thing. Whether it's drugs, whether it's trafficking, or whether it's an adulterous, an affair, whatever that is, it's done in darkness. But Jesus says, I am the light of the world. See, with Jesus, when you're following him, you are not in darkness of this world. So the only action that we have to do, right? We've been the salt. We've been there. We've seen the salt. We've seen how it makes plants grow. We've seen how it actually makes the smell of our other stuff pretty good and covers it up, and it's a detergent and it gets rid of it. We've seen that as a salt. Now what do we do with the light? We're now in the light. Where do we put that light? Jesus said, and it's the only time he said it to his disciples and applied it to himself. He said, I am the light of the world, and you are the light of the world. And then he told them to do something. He said, you will put your light high upon a hill so that it can be seen, so that people will see it. And that's what we got to do. We've got to show our Christianity, because we are the light. We shine. And it doesn't mean to say you walk around looking as if you've sucked a coat hanger. It means we shine for Jesus. And it can be seen in our moral attitude, in our way of life, and everything that we do. We shine for him because we are the light of this world and we are the salt of the soil. God bless and amen. Thank you.